Good evening, everybody. I'm going to call to order our workshop for the Borough of Gettysburg for the month of April 2024. I don't have any opening remarks. I do have a couple brief announcements. An executive session of the Borough Council was conducted immediately following the adjournment of the April 8th, 2024 business meeting of the Borough Council, consistent with sections 708A1 and section 708A5 of the Sunshine Act. An executive session will be conducted immediately following the adjournment of this evening's monthly work session, consistent with section 708A1 and section 708A5 of the Sunshine Act for the following purposes: to provide information and to discuss matters of employment and the terms and conditions of employment of current and prospective employees, and to review and discuss matters of borough business which, if conducted in public, could lead to the disclosure of information or matters of confidentiality protected by law. We do not have any special presentations this evening, so that takes us to public comment for the night. This first section is restricted to items appearing on tonight's agenda. Those items include sidewalk ordinance revisions, including stormwater management and shade tree, sign ordinance revisions, the Gettysburg Welcome Center construction and management, temporary reserved metered spaces for museums and churches, the SS4A grant application, and updates to the ordinance on online and electronic payments for the public. So for this first section, please limit your comments to those topics. Please limit yourself to 5 minutes. We ask that you use the podium. We need your name and your address of residence, please. Is there any public comment? All right. I see none, so we will move into our current business. The first item on the agenda tonight is the sidewalk ordinance revision. Those of you who have been watching this riveting subject for the last couple months know that we have sort of a large undertaking here, and so we are breaking this up into bite-sized pieces. So tonight we will handle two of the issues that are outstanding, stormwater management as it intersects with sidewalks, and then the shade tree ordinance. So I will turn this over to Mr. Gable, Mr. Whitmore, and Mr. Clayball.
So I'll kick it off. Here's the Venn diagram. I think it's always useful to look at this so everyone can get a feel for exactly how complicated council's task is before it. President Moon said, well, tonight's discussion revolves around point B and D. I'll read directly from the policy briefing summary that was provided to council so that the public can get a better feel for what's being discussed here tonight. At the March 25th, 2024 work session meeting, council directed staff to develop resolutions and/or ordinances to be adopted or implemented with reference to items F and G. F and G are the Lincoln Square management and Lincoln Square, the center circle maintenance of both of those. Staff is in the process of researching deeds to determine the exact boundaries of properties located on Lincoln Square. Once that is complete, staff will draft new and/or revised ordinances and/or resolutions for council consideration related to items F and G. Tonight, for item B, Exhibit 7, which is provided to the council, is the current stormwater management ordinance, which the public can access through the borough's website. Exhibit 8 is the borough's current sidewalk ordinance, all provided for easy reference. Both of the preceding affect one another as it relates to the best way to convey stormwater across a sidewalk from an adjacent property. With respect to sidewalk guidelines, the borough currently utilizes the public right-of-way accessibility guidelines and can be viewed at the attached web address. The exhibits in the policy briefing summary 11A through 11K currently depict design standards for sidewalks in the borough as provided by the borough engineer. Point D, Exhibit 12, is the borough shade tree ordinance. For your reference, it has long been a challenge to manage street trees whose roots damage the surrounding sidewalk and then ask the adjacent property owner to cover the expenses for the repairs. Additionally, the Shade Tree Commission, who is charged with placing and maintaining the borough's street trees, has no identifiable process in place where locations are selected for the placement of street trees. This has long frustrated adjacent property owners who are not aware of when a street tree would be placed. And for discussion for the council more broadly here tonight, are there other stormwater matters that may interact with or affect the broader sidewalk ordinance? So the challenge here for point B, there are multiple locations throughout the borough where stormwater crosses the sidewalk, usually in a depressed area in the pavement, resulting in a non-compliant sidewalk for ADA purposes. Additionally, these divots create a hazard for all pedestrian traffic by essentially creating a tripping hazard. Staff recommends the following. Amend the sidewalk ordinance, cross-reference with the stormwater ordinance as appropriate, requiring a stormwater leader from adjacent properties to be buried in conduit under the sidewalk, thus creating a seamless and level pavement surface, consistent with sidewalk design standards noted in Exhibits 11A through 11K. 2, provide property owners with a cost-effective option to get their sidewalks compliant with ADA standards. This may come in the form of a broader sidewalk repair replacement program, which as of the writing of this PBS still is in its formative stages. Do we want to talk about that for now, and then we can deal with shade tree?
Yep. So is everybody familiar with what we're talking about here? The sort of existing, there's a variety of ways people have tried to move the stormwater from their roofs, so we're talking about gutters, across the sidewalk. So at one point here in the borough, it was, I guess, in vogue to have a trench sort of across the sidewalk, which obviously is an obstacle for a mobility device and for a person with a disability, but it is also a pretty amazing trip hazard for anybody. Bicycles would struggle with them, skateboards would struggle with them, mobility devices, etc. So if you walk up and down the first couple blocks of Chambersburg Street, you'll see a few different approaches to having fixed that. Some people have buried that pipe and then put a metal plate over it, and those metal plates can be in various states of decay. Sometimes they are not affixed permanently, and they can be knocked out of position, creating an even worse trip hazard. I can think of one storefront where the trench was just filled in with gravel, and they don't bother with it anymore. But it's still a trip hazard as well. And then I think we have some properties have a pipe that runs under the concrete. That's what was done with the Interloop project, that when they put new sidewalks in on my property, they put the existing pipes, which already had penetrations in the curb line. They put those under the sidewalk when they poured it. That works pretty well, except one of them, I'm pretty sure it was a PVC pipe, but I'm pretty sure it broke when the concrete was curing and kind of swelling and contracting. So not always an ideal solution either. But then I think we have a really good example of some engineering on this, just on this next block of High Street in front of some of the churches, where a lined trench was installed that has a removable, replaceable, serviceable, and permeable grate that is sidewalk safe and is also serviceable. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to see those, but they're pretty cool. So I think the question here is, do we want to establish guidelines for how those should be constructed in the future, and whether we're in agreement or not that where existing obstacles or little trenches or whatever are identified, that we need to set up a timetable and a means for replacement in cooperation with the property owners. So those are the two questions in front of us tonight. Anybody care to share some thoughts?
Does the ADA have a say in the trenches?
Yeah, the ADA, and Chad, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it says we can't have a lip greater than half an inch. I can't imagine a world where the trenches are compliant.
It's a combination of the lip. It can be a 1/4 inch if it's got a beveled edge, but otherwise it's gotta be, I mean, it can only be a 1/4 inch and that's has a beveled edge, and it can be a 1/2 inch. And even then, it still needs to meet a slope of 8.3%. Most of them, I don't know if I could paint with a broad brush and say that all of them don't meet that compliance, but it's very likely that most of them do not meet those standards. So on its face, it's pretty simple. Those, we can't use those anymore. If you have them, they need to be eliminated. The ADA law hasn't necessarily gone out of its way and said that you need to start being proactive about replacing those things until the sidewalks are otherwise getting repaired. If the sidewalks are otherwise getting repaired, they have to be eliminated and brought up to speed. And then Matt brought up he did a good job of there of outlining some of the scenarios, the ways that you can fix this. If you can run a pipe straight underneath of the sidewalk, right through the face of the curb, that's best. But sometimes you don't have enough curb reveal. It's based on the curb reveal. We would love to have an 8-inch reveal curb and a 4-inch pipe that come through the sidewalk, and that would work great. But sometimes the reveal is not much. You can try to fit a 3-inch pipe. If you get down to like a 4-inch reveal and you just can't fit anything but like a 2-inch pipe, 2-inch pipes get clogged really quickly. So then you have to go to the trench drains that Matt was talking about. Those things they usually work great on day one, but they have a freeze thaw expansion and contraction differentiation between that and concrete. So sometimes over a couple of years, as they're freezing and expanding, they'll start to separate a little bit from the concrete, and then they'll have a 1/4 inch lip. That's all you get, 1/4 inch, until you have to have a beveled edge. So those things work good right off the bat, but then over the years, that's why if you can bury the pipe, that's always best. But if you don't have enough cover over that pipe, then it cracks along the top of that pipe, so we try to put some chicken wire or something in there we can. There is another option. The best option is if there's a storm drain in the street, we like to take a trunk line down and connect a couple of properties to it, like on South Street. Probably most people don't realize it, that I'm going to say 50% of the houses on South Street, we tied all of the roof leaders into a trunk line that goes down the sidewalk, and then it punches into the back of an inlet. We don't like to have each roof leader individually punch into our storm pipe, because that creates too many perforations into our storm pipe. But if you can tie a couple of them together and then run them into the back of an inlet, that's the best solution.
Middle Street's done that way too.
There's Middle,
East
we did
Middle.
East Middle, we did Stratton, Steinware, South. There's several streets that we've done that type of a treatment to, but that takes a couple of property owners to cooperate, on a single solution there. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways, I guess, to handle it, but the bottom line is the trenches just aren't ADA compliant. So I think the real question that Matt outlined is, how proactive do you want to get to getting people to bring them up to speed?
So we can choose to do nothing and leave them as is, and hopefully nobody gets an accessibility lawsuit, and hopefully nobody gets injured. So that's one option. As we are sort of undertaking sidewalks, as the big picture view here, this is an opportunity for us to set some standards. I'm not hearing a lot of strong opinions here, so would everybody be comfortable if the engineer and Robbie work together to come up with 2 or 3 workable solutions depending on a situation, and then we work those into the design standards into the ordinance for new sidewalks, and then of course bringing the existing ones up to speed where they must be?
I think it's important. My question is, how many properties have you identified that will need this?
I've not done that analysis. Have you
Okay,
guys?
I was just curious.
We don't know that
Yeah.
number.
Do
a lot.
you, I was gonna say a lot, so I was gonna say, do you estimate it'll be quite a few?
Yeah, I would have to say it's hundreds.
Okay. All right.
Kind of as a
Good to know, thank
follow-up
you.
to my colleague question, I'm wondering just how the implementation and how would you get compliance? And is it something that, when you mentioned like South Street and Steinway, was that when the street was torn up and we were doing a lot of work to it, right?
Yeah, and of
So-
course, that was $1 million project, right? Had all the utility work and everything, so
Right.
that wasn't a cheap solution.
But the residents that lived on that block, how much was their contribution to that?
Zero.
Yeah, so that.
Because they were all projects.
So
Yeah,
it
it was-
becomes an issue in terms of, how some properties, I mean, that's the $1 million question we have to deal with, is how do we, some residents have to pay for it, and others, it gets tied into a major road project. And that becomes, equity issue, it becomes, how affordability. So I think we can all agree that we should not just sit and just we should have some sort of standards, I agree, especially regarding accessibility. But how we implement that's a bigger question,
It is, but as we've discussed before, we do have, sort of an unfortunate situation with our sidewalks where we will invest $150,000 per intersection to put in the curb cuts and the truncated domes and get those up to code, but then we don't do anything with the vast expanse of pavement in between those curb cuts. So it's all well and good to have accessible intersections, but if the rest of the block is inaccessible, you have a situation much like what we have here, which is where you don't see people with mobility devices using our sidewalks freely. And the reason we don't see them is not because they're not here, it's because the sidewalks are not accessible.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Is there a most cost-effective solution that, have you costed them out at all?
I'm not sure if there's an analysis done, but the simple answer is if there's enough curb reveal, is running the pipe underneath.
Okay.
If you have enough curb reveal, if not, you know what I mean, if you have an 8-inch curb reveal, then you can run a 4-inch pipe underneath of the sidewalk right to the face of the curb. That's definitely going to be the cheapest option. But there's a lot of places, more than half, where the curb reveal is maybe 3 inches or something like that, and that's just not an option. So then you got to go to the trench drain. That's the next most expensive option. And then to run in a pipe to an inlet somewhere is obviously the most expensive option.
Thank you.
But you're probably looking at even to cut a couple pieces of sidewalk out and running a pipe underneath of it. Even that alone is not something cheap. We're looking at a couple $1,000.
Right.
A few weeks ago, we heard from a resident who spoke to us about her situation. She received a letter, as a number of people did, about sidewalks, and she used to have a store at the corner of, I think it's maybe Water and Carlisle, and I walked out there to look at it, and the sidewalk piece that she's referring to that has some yellow paint on it to kind of, as a warning, is actually part of the bridge over the Stevens Run. So I'm wondering how much of that is her sidewalk or how much is our responsibility as well. And so that's another, again, throwing in another monkey wrench in the whole discussion,
Right, well, I mean, as the ordinance currently reads, the entirety of that sidewalk is the property owner's expense. I mean, the bridge didn't rise, the sidewalk shrank, sank. And the argument that was made that night was, well, I haven't fixed it for decades, so why should I now? And I don't know that that's necessarily the best argument to make.
I understand that. But
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's really complicated, the whole thing is complicated.
No, it is, and this is a big topic that's gonna
Yeah,
cost
and
the
a big
borough and a lot of
expense.
people a lot of money, but if we're
Right.
not gonna do anything, then we should just stop the whole process right now.
Right.
So we need to make decisions.
Yeah.
Right.
I have one more question. Do you see or know of any projects that we're undergoing that we would be able to mitigate some of these issues with the sidewalks? Baltimore Street,
That's
for
the biggie.
example, that's the biggie. And so you foresee possibly being able to tie some of those sidewalk repairs into it? Okay. And how about any other projects in the borough that are potentially,
Going on Washington.
could be?
Yeah, North Gase, the Gaisburg Interloop on North Washington Street.
I see.
We'll have the same trunk line type of a thing. In
Gotcha.
Baltimore Street, we'll have that.
Okay. So some houses will be spared a cost in that case. All right.
Yeah, that's some of what Patty's comment was,
right.
is you kind of get winners and losers as
You
we
do.
have, you know, a Columbia Gas project come through, and they're repairing all the sidewalks, that's our time that we do it, but, you know, Columbia Gas or lines don't run in front of everybody's sidewalks.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Okay.
Looking for opinions here.
We're obviously not the first community to be dealing with this, so do we have any examples? Maybe I'll ask our engineer from other communities, and how they deal with this. You're smiling, I don't know.
Yeah, because every community struggles with it, and none of them have a good I have not seen a good answer to this question.
I would suggest we're on a cutting-edge path to deal with this, where we're, in the formative stages of a cost-share type policy. That I've not seen anywhere else.
Okay.
It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I, off the top of my head, I don't know of one.
I've
So
heard
we-
of it down around, like the one guy that I work with, he has a beach house at Cape May, and they said that they have a program where all of the people in the community owns the sidewalks, and it's part of their fees. But around in Pennsylvania, I don't know of any, and at least in Adams County, I don't know of any other.
Like, I'm thinking like other tourist towns like Lancaster, or,
Lancaster struggles with it. We do engineering for them,
Yeah.
and they struggle with the same thing. So
Same thing.
I don't think they have the answer. I think you got to go to California or Cape May or something like that, where there's an answer to this question.
So I think the question is, what standards do you want? And then, once you establish those, we'll figure out how to best make that happen financially.
I think if we get provided a few options that we can look at, and then make the decision that's cost-effective for when they're repaired, or if the sidewalk is earmarked for this needs to be repaired, then at that time, you take care of the stormwater.
Sure, but we will have sidewalks that are not gonna be touched for decades, right? Like, we don't have a capital improvement plan for Chambersburg Street, which is where I think some of, besides Baltimore, maybe some of the worst pedestrian experiences on Chambersburg Street. We don't have there's nothing in the capital improvement plan that's gonna say, in X number of years, we'll be pursuing, Y millions of dollars to do those sidewalks, but that doesn't mean we don't have sort of an imperative to address this in the meantime. When we don't have standards in place and people do work often without permits, and they don't meet the specifications that the borough would prefer, we get sort of the same patchwork approach to remediation that we already see. I mean, the reason we don't have an answer as to whether, any of these existing trenches are compliant or not is because they were all handmade with no rules. Like, maybe one guy used a pipe to roll it out, and another guy did it with a trowel, and some of them are really deep, some of them are almost perfectly concave, and some of them are very shallow. So, and in a weird old town like this, where there have not been standards for 200 and some odd years, we're not gonna find one answer that works for every property. So many of these historic properties we'll look at it and go, well, that is completely unique. So we have to come up with a solution that fits that property. And it may not be the same thing as the building right next door. And it might be a much more expensive solution for one building than the one right next door. We're not gonna come up with a completely fair and equitable thing, but we can come up with a standard for the sidewalks must be passable. And you must
See.
deal with this stormwater, and it must be remediated, in the following ways.
And I would agree with that. I think to come up with some sort of standard it would be incumbent upon us to do that. And I'm thinking about a residence I know that just recently sold that has horrible sidewalks. But yet, if we had the standards, you know, realtors had them, and so when a property is gonna exchange hands,
Yeah.
they could share those standards with the new buyers so that they would know, and they put that into part of their cost to renovate the house, or, you know, that would be part of their, so I do think we should set some sort of standards here, as a body.
Oh, I agree, and I think we need to do it by ordinance, right? So
Yes.
in the past,
Yep.
the standards have been set by
Right.
whoever happens to be sitting at Mr. Whitmore's desk.
Right,
And those standards might not carry over to the next person.
right.
And property owners who have attempted remediation have been given wildly different answers depending on who answers the phone.
Right.
So we need to kind of codify something.
I would agree with that.
So I have a feel the need to pick up on what Matt's saying, because that's a really important point he's making. The ordinance I got in front of me, it says here, it's in accordance with the lines and grades established by the borough engineer. So it's whoever the borough engineer is at the time to establish these lines and grades. What exactly is lines and grades? And when Pete was trying to enforce these, he asked us, and I said, it's very simple to me. It goes back to what we call the PROWAG, is the cute little acronym for what Charles said earlier as the public right-of-way accessibility guidelines. The Department of Justice has these all laid out. It's a very big document. We don't need to relay it out. So the standards for ADA compliance are already developed for us. They're very standard things across the board. All the engineers use the exact same slopes. We all know what the PROWAG is. So all we have to do is point to it. In our ordinance, we currently don't. So it is important that we have an ordinance that does point to the proper standards, not just the line and grade established by the borough engineer.
No offense.
No offense to the engineer, right?
That guy, I don't know. All right, so I'll ask it again. Is everybody, would anybody disagree with the concept of asking the engineer to come up with these design standards?
I would like to point, looking forward, we got to give the residents a reasonable time frame.
Oh, hell, yeah, oh, yeah, oh,
And I'll
yeah.
probably bring up, there was just recently sidewalks in my neighborhood, they gave them a month, and it was a couple months ago, and it was
Winter.
winter time, so, you know, affordability, give them time to look at the options, raise the
Yeah.
money, and of course, we talked about loans and things as well, so I don't know
Right.
if 6 months, you know, a month would be, hey, you gotta get this fixed in a month.
That's
too-
rough, that's rough.
That's no way.
So, I mean, I think what the current ordinance spells out, and I will say, this might be the shortest agenda of the year, but I think it had the most reading out of anything we're seeing. That was pretty intense today. The current ordinance spells out that you have 30 days to fix an issue when it is addressed. But I think we have an opportunity and a responsibility here, as we are sort of revamping everything, to create a period where these programs are phased in and people are given ample time, ample warning, and as much time as as we can work out to set up financing or figure out what our cost sharing model is going to be, or even identify, like, well, we found out Columbia Gas will be coming through here in 2 years. So do we then give a special dispensation? So I think we have a lot of homework to do there. And you're right. I don't think it should just be the second we sign this, you have 30 days, folks. Get hit the bricks. Like, I mean, we need to have some grace here. That's a really good point.
So yes, I agree with most everything that's just been said. It's a hard situation because we're making standards for how property owners are to deal with their sidewalk, but yet we're also telling them what they can and can't put on the sidewalk, and we're telling them how to what they can do, that they have to clear things like leaves and snow. and putting trees in their sidewalk that they didn't ask for. So it's a hard topic for sure, but at the end of the day, absolutely, it needs to be ADA compliant. I think anything less than that is a no.
It's not even,
Anything more
it's
than
not
that.
optional.
Well,
It's,
the federal law said
Anything
you
more
can't-
than that
it isn't.
is debatable, because, you know, I come from a different argument of the community should pay for it. The community should be, meaning us, not the property owner. But no one wants taxes raised, I agree.
Right.
So it's definitely a hard situation, but, yeah, and as far as, you know, we're doing this work on the curbs, and not a lot, we're not doing anything between, well, yes, we are, we're putting trees there that are ruining the sidewalks. So that's what we're doing. But if someone gets hurt, or there's an ADA issue, it's not just the property owner that's going to get sued.
that's right,
It's the borough as well.
that's right.
So at the very least, I agree on the issues of the ADA compliancy and nothing less.
Yeah, and I just want to really spell that out, especially for the public too. ADA compliance is not, you know, a lofty goal we can aspire to. It is a mandate. It is part of the Civil Rights Act of 1967, as well as the Rehabilitation Act, and then again, the ADA of 1992. We don't have the option of just codifying a stance of let's kick this can down the road forever. Anytime we change the rules, we need to bring them up to date with the ADA. That is the bare minimum we have to do, and it's a lot, right? We have to make our sidewalks accessible. Okay, so is everybody comfortable with that plan of having the engineer and Mr. Claybaugh and his firm come up with those design standards? Okay. I think that takes us to the shade tree question then.
Does. Point D, with regard to the Borough Shade Tree Ordinance, Borough Council currently has a limited role in the Shade Tree Commission, in that the Shade Tree Commission is appointed by the Borough Council, like other ABCs. Once they are seated, they generally operate autonomously. This has proven problematic based on the leadership of the commission at certain points over time. Not disparaging any of those leaders, it's just they have a different philosophy on how to adjudicate the shade tree ordinance. So staff recommends to consult with the borough solicitor on whether the council can put processes and procedures in the ordinance where the Shade Tree Commission must then adhere to those processes and procedures. We've heard many comments recently about you wake up one morning and suddenly there's a curb cut and the sidewalk's cut and in goes a tree that no one knew about. 2, incorporate remediation of sidewalk stormwater conveyance into the broader sidewalk replacement program, which speaks to the financial aspect that is still in its very formative stages. A lot to consider here on this point. No one seems to be very happy with the current processes in place with the Shade Tree Commission. The question for the solicitor is, what involvement does the council have in helping direct that decision-making body?
They're part of you, so they're not separate and autonomous. They are part and parcel of you. It's part of the borough.
But there is no
You have-
process in
you
place
have, I
in
mean,
the current Shade Tree
You
ordinance.
have, yes, yeah, and they've been empowered by an ordinance that's been enacted by the borough. So the borough does have a fair amount of say in how that process should be undertaken.
Yes. I think we have agreed previously that we all do need to visit the Shade Tree Program in its totality, especially when it comes to placement. We've all heard from property owners who were surprised to find trees going in without any consultation. And I don't think that's the way any of us envision any of our ABCs working. But I think the pertinent question before us here has to do with sidewalks and sidewalk repair. So, this is a big question, right? Who is responsible when a shade tree, so this is a tree owned by the borough, placed by the borough, destroys sidewalk? The current ordinance says the property owner is responsible. Well, maybe you didn't want that tree, but it went in anyways. One of the properties that was cited over by Chris's house a month or so ago, those trees are so old, they probably predate the Shade Tree Commission. They may have been placed by the borough, they may have been placed by a previous owner. We really have no way of knowing the history of these giant, beautiful trees. But I will tell you that that sidewalk is like a lunar landscape. It is completely impassable. I mean, you can get by on foot if you're nimble, but if you have any issues with mobility at all, I think you'd be taking your life into your hands. Also, there's some very enthusiastic dogs in that yard, and if they come charging at you and you're on uneven footing and they startle you, you could take a spill there. So in that case, it's like, well, there's a good question. You know, who owns that tree? I think it would be probably argued that the borough owns that tree and that the Shade Tree Commission owns it, even if they didn't plant it, as they have taken ownership of the program that puts trees in these planting strips. Then there's a lot of questions we can address when we talk about shade tree more in depth, but I think the big one right before us today is who is responsible for the sidewalk repair when those panels are heaved by a tree root. And I think most people would, without much deliberation, say, well, clearly the borough is responsible. I think I would tend to say that. And then like 2 seconds later, I kind of go, oh yeah, well, we're all the borough. So if we say that the borough is responsible for fixing what's probably, we have no idea. I'm going to throw a number out there, which might be make-believe. It might be low. I'm going to say $10 million worth of sidewalk. It could be more. It could be less. We don't know. So if we just say, well, that's the borough's responsibility, everybody in this room is going to be paying a lot more in taxes over the next 10 years, so we fix those. Like a lot more. The idea that we would come up with a interest-free loan program is great. The idea that we would come up with some sort of cost-sharing program, this is all great. But this very fundamental question here is what we kind of need to tackle here today. Whose responsibility is it to fix sidewalk that has been heaved by tree roots that the borough planted?
Can I speak of my
Please.
concrete example, because it really makes me think about it? So my neighbors, the sidewalk is terrible.
Yeah.
And they want to fix it because they know they could be sued and they don't want anybody to get hurt. But the trees are 30 feet and they don't want to fix it while those trees are still standing. And I would say they're willing to fix the sidewalk if the borough takes care of the trees. We're going to have to do something, I mean, because the trees are going to keep growing.
Right.
And because the one neighbor fixed it about 15, 20 years ago. And 15 years later, it's back up again because the tree grows. So,
There's another good example right by your house too, where there's sidewalk that is essentially brand new. 7, 8 years ago, Columbia Gas came through and redid massive swaths of the sidewalk on your block and then put in street trees. And it's either like 1 or 2 doors down from your house, we have a slab of brand new sidewalk that's already 5 inches off of level because of this immature street tree. I mean, 8 years old. And that sidewalk is already impassable.
So when Columbia Gas put the shade trees in, or the trees in, did they get permission from the Shade Tree Commission, or they just threw some trees in?
They worked with the borough on that.
Okay, I
yeah.
was just curious, I thought, okay.
I think they even went so far as to ask owners what
Type.
species they would want, and I mean, they were cool about it.
he picked the one that was there before, which would, 30 feet. So it wasn't,
Something small.
and I can't say anything, I picked the ornamental cherry, which doesn't grow that
Yeah.
high, so.
Right,
But
let's
I
hear it,
would,
gang.
I would be for, the shade tree, the borough has to take care of the trees.
And the heaves?
Well, the sidewalk probably would, and I saw there's, one of the proposals was that the borough, and Robbie can tell me if this is right, the borough would remove the old sidewalk and pour the gravel, and the property owners would pour the concrete. Is that something that was discussed?
By who?
I remember reading it in our materials,
Did that come from the Shade Tree Commission chair?
not from the
No,
shade tree.
That's one of the concepts we're currently thinking about in terms of the cost share for replacing or repairing a sidewalk.
I read that too. I read it the same way.
Yeah. That's not specific to shade tree, it's more
More
general
right.
thought on how to make this affordable for folks to fix a sidewalk. Just so everyone understands, we, the borough, already do maintain the trees as far as pruning and things. It's what we do with the heaved sidewalks that we don't manage.
Right.
Yeah.
Replacement of sidewalks is labor intensive, so if you do a share like Charles just discussed, the borough does that, and then the private property owners pay for the concrete. It takes the bidding process out of it, and then you add 30% to that cost with prevailing wages and stuff. So if you can do it if you can do something like that and avoid that bidding process, you certainly save some money.
That's interesting. Here, Robbie, if we were to, later on when we tackle other portions of the sidewalk, if we were to require pinning, how does that work? Would you drill, like if you removed a section of damaged sidewalk, would you drill holes into the existing slabs on either side?
Well, that would be the contractor that pours the cement. That's his responsibility for.
But that's how it would
Yeah.
functionally work?
Yeah.
You
he
can
would have
drill
to
into the existing?
existing, pin it, and then we'd also have to have expansion joint as well.
Right.
You've talked to John Lawler, haven't you?
Well, we've all talked to John.
That's one of his pet peeves is
Yeah.
pinning to the neighboring sidewalk.
Well, and it would control the heaves to some extent,
Mhm.
right? I mean, it would heave them as they would buckle together as opposed to having, the offset.
Exactly.
All right, gang. Whose responsibility is it when a shade tree buckles the sidewalk?
The boroughs.
The boroughs.
And I think it's important to have the processes and procedures in place, so it's really clear to the property owners. I wouldn't want someone planting a tree, and I love trees, but I wouldn't want someone planting a tree in front of my sidewalk without any knowledge, and they just start digging. I think it's important for transparency, and I think it's important so we have a record for the future. I mean, we've got to think about like 50, 60 years from now, and these trees are enormous, or maybe 10 years, depending on the how quickly the tree grows. But I think it's important that if we haven't documented what has happened in the last 250 years, then we need to start sometime
Yep.
with the process.
Everybody on this end comfortable with that answer? Any opposition to that? Okay. You have what you need on that?
Yup.
All right.
Get started.
Well, since you're still on it, I don't know if we just answered it or not. But the number one, consult with the borough solicitor on whether the council can put processes and procedures in the ordinance.
Oh, of course you can.
Yeah. And is there any other, and if there is, can you give an example of authority boards and commissions of the borough of Gettysburg that are using borough funds and borough staff to do their work?
I mean, all of them,
All of them.
yeah.
So we definitely need to. They cannot just work alone and call the shots without. I absolutely, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any more thoughts to share on those two questions tonight? If not, we will move on to item 4,
Get the
which is the
Side by
sign
side going
ordinance
on.
revisions. So a little background while Mr. Whitmore gets ready here.
So in late sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, in late 2023, Borough Council was considering the adoption of an amended sign ordinance, which went through multiple revisions since 2017. Numerous public comments in opposition to the newly drafted ordinance cause the council to vote to table the adoption of the revised and amended sign ordinance in deference to further consideration and revisions. Since then, staff convened a working group to evaluate public input and make recommendations for the additional revisions to the sign ordinance. The staff's working group comprised the following persons: Borough Planning Department staff, the Borough Manager, a member of the County Planning Office, a member of Borough Council, President of Main Street Gettysburg, and occasionally participation from invited stakeholders from the public. The current iteration of the sign ordinance, which is in your exhibits as number 4, incorporates suggestions received in public comment and is compliant with the Supreme Court ruling in the case of Reed versus Gilbert. Council should consider the current draft of the sign ordinance and direct next steps. So on the screen behind you, we have a side-by-side of the current sign ordinance and the draft sign ordinance for your consideration. And maybe, do you want to talk about the highlights first
Yeah.
before we get into the
So,
minutia?
yeah, the big high point with this one is your current ordinance utilizes a ratio of 1 square foot of signage for every 1 linear foot of frontage. Now, there's a maximum of 50 square feet. When we went into this, really we're trying to allow for more signage. And I'm put a little asterisk with that, because the challenge with more signage is also making it compliant from a historic preservation component. So, over the course of the, 8 to 10 meetings we had, we went back and forth on how to provide opportunities for commercial language to be expressed to the public, while also, once again, maintaining that the neighborhood feels. Really, what we've gone for with this is to allow for a process where HARB would become involved with sign review. Currently, they're not in the actual practice of reviewing signage. One of the concerns that historically has occurred is going through a HARB review takes time. And in particular, when it's signage on historic buildings, what we end up finding is it's not so much new signage, it's change of copy face, or it's utilizing existing sign holes. So basically not necessarily all new signage, but components of signage that over time and over the entire expanse of the historic district can create some issues. One of the, unique aspects of this is looking at other jurisdictions that have very vibrant historic districts. Many of them have extremely limited signage availability. So what we really wanted to do was allow for a method for A, having adequate signage, B, having a method for a public review in those historic district properties that are going to be more vulnerable to change, making sure that we're keeping not only the goals of the sign ordinance, but also our zoning ordinance and other ordinances related to quality of life and built environments. Being able to have a review that is going to be more technical than just say court review if someone were going to appeal a challenge. But then also in areas outside the historic district, allowing for that ratio again, 1-to-1. So there might be instances, the example I gave was, we look at Steinware, you look at going out York, not necessarily York, that's not a good example, but areas where you have more auto-oriented, transportation-based commercial copies language, so like not necessarily billboards, but when you're talking about like McDonald's and those sorts of uses, they're going to have more signage. They're advertising to a different person than, say, someone on pedestrian level. Recognizing that there's going to be the need for that signage, but also wanting to continue to make the case that we don't want Steinware to be the way Steinware was. And that came up quite frequently. It's the desire to have a very orderly basis for the signage and not having almost a Las Vegas approach where it can work in certain areas, but there's also, that provides the opportunity for discouragement, negative comment. So we went into this with that aspect, just how to help with increasing it. But then also, other areas that we looked at were thinking about signage that's inside of the structure. How do we work with that to allow for businesses to be able to promote wares, but then also maintaining the physical character of the individual structure. And then, I guess the big one would be, not the big one, but one of the other main portions of this regulation is then ensuring that we have, in addition to the building signage, the signage that's on the sidewalks, allowing for those right-of-way A-frame based signs to occur, but also meeting our requirements for ADA. Currently, many of the sidewalks that we have throughout the borough are not very helpful with ADA. We also have a multitude of furniture, trash cans, light poles, a lot of stuff on the sidewalks that really limits general mobility. And then you put a sign out there. So how do we encourage that while also allowing for people to be able to freely travel about the sidewalk? Something we looked into. A lot of this, I guess the goal would be allowing for new opportunities, allowing for the business tenant to have more freedom, but for those historic properties, really making sure that it still is maintaining what the Architectural Review Board would like to see for the physical structure. So I kind of wandered all around with that. It isn't exactly a page turner. I'm sure you all enjoyed reading it, but
No, that was the stormwater from earlier. That was much better.
with this, the goal after presentation tonight, bringing it up before the various business stakeholder groups and also the HARB board in May, just to see what their thoughts are, because for every, I guess, argument that we had for an increased signage opportunity, I felt bad because Gary Schaefer would be in those meetings and I thought I was going to kill him, because it's like he really, as a member of HARB, cherishes the built environment that Gettysburg has been able to achieve with strong regulation.
Right.
So it's a very interesting conversation from my end, but it's something where I think we're going to have a product that it's taking a little while, but I'm hopeful that it'll be a better product than we currently have on the books, and something that should be able to, I guess, encourage additional commercial advertising opportunities.
So do I understand correctly, you're saying you're eliminating the formula for the size limitation?
The formula would be permitted by default, a business tenant would be able to have 50 square feet of signage. If they're outside of the historic district, depending on if it's a single tenant or if it's a multi-tenant structure, they'd be able to utilize the entire building linear footage around the building to establish that ratio of the 1-to-1. So you could have a situation where if you have 100 linear feet of space around your building, then you'd be able to have 100 square feet of signage. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And it's something we want to make sure that everyone's comfortable with. The alternative, though, especially the scenario I brought up in one of the meetings, when you look at the signage requirements for most newly built restaurant uses, the chains, it's much, much more than that. So it still has a limiting capacity, but it's not as stringent as currently applied throughout the entire borough. Now, one thing, having this regulation be separate from the zoning ordinance, it doesn't allow for the zoning hearing board to be involved. Sometimes those types of appeals boards will become a little fast and loose with
granting variances for signage, it's a difficult thing when it's part of a zoning ordinance, because being able to quantify the actual, the taking or the limitation of the ordinance on the individual property owner, depending on what they're using the property for, they might need more signage, they might need less. It really becomes a case-by-case basis, and as a result, the ordinance becomes Swiss cheese really quick. What we're really trying to go for with this is something that is, their ordinance would be durable, would be something that isn't going to have radical impacts throughout the borough, because in many instances, the businesses, especially in the historic districts, they don't have a whole lot of area for signage, but being cognizant of, I guess, the need and the ability for some of those unique situations, like where we have like the hotel, where they have quite a bit of space, they have numerous tenants, being able to provide adequate signage for all of them isn't necessarily provided in our current ordinance. So it's something that's gone into the drafting of this current draft.
Great. So a couple points to follow up there. Now, as you all know, we are currently working with Michael Baker International, who are a firm that does a lot of civil engineering projects. And so as we are in the midst of replacing the zoning ordinance, I did consult with Troy from Michael Baker and ask, is it more or less common to have the sign stipulations included in the zoning ordinance? And he said probably more municipalities than not would include it in the zoning ordinance, but most of those municipalities do not have the historic district challenges that we do. And the places you might see that more, like the city of York, where you have zones that have much more articulated character differentiation. So, the bypass on the north side has a very different character than downtown York. So you can very easily put those rules in the zoning, whereas other municipalities like ours, that would be much more challenging. The other point I wanted to make too, just for everybody's benefit here, one of the things we heard in public comment in November, December, January was, even though we had crafted a revision to the ordinance that was more permissive than the one we had, one of the questions that was asked was, why should it matter if somebody wants to put a lighted sign in their storefront window as long as it's tasteful? And I really need to stress this. That is a question we cannot broach here. The whole reason we started this process in 2017 is because in 2015, the Supreme Court said that municipalities cannot govern the content of a sign. So the only place that the borough of Gettysburg has any control over signage is size, placement, and quantity. We cannot in any way come up with rules to dictate what is tasteful or what the content of a sign is. So as we are making our way here to a revision that is even more permissive than the one we came up with for discussion in December, I just want everybody to bear in mind that if we all want to avoid the Steinway Avenue of the 1970s, strict rules is how you do that. If you want a more permissive approach, I think that's what the working group has come up with. And some of the compromises they've come to here, I think, are reasonable. And I really appreciate everybody's input on that. I want to thank Peter for participating in that, and Mr. Whitmore, thank you for grabbing the reins pretty much the day you started here and running with this. So, discussion.
President Moon, I
Yeah.
just wanted to clarify, though, that the Town of Gilbert decision by the U.S. Supreme Court only applies to non-commercial speech, not all speech. So,
Interesting.
yes, so it's non-commercial speech that in terms of the provision of ordinances, must be content neutral. You have more flexibility in terms of regulating commercial speech. So it's not the same standard.
Okay.
Just wanted to make.
That's good to know.
I have another question. I'd like to comment on the sign ordinance. Should I do that now, or when is my opportunity to comment on the sign ordinance?
The proposed revision?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can take comment.
Okay, can I do that now?
Sure, go for it.
Or should be the one time be better?
I mean, if you want to keep it for public comment, you can do it, but if it's pertinent to this discussion, and if anybody has something to say, I think this is the time to do that.
Okay.
Go for it.
My name is Paul Witt. I'm live on Fairview Avenue in Gettysburg. I have two businesses on Steimer Avenue, which we have signs for. I'm, for years, have been very much a big proponent of the sign ordinance. I think it's good for the borough. I think that, like you said, there were huge signs before the sign ordinance came in. We don't want to go back to that sort of a thing. I think the 50 square feet maximum per business, per street frontage is perfectly adequate. Our sign, we have 500 square feet of frontage, we have 50 square foot sign, and that's perfectly adequate. I don't think we need any more than that. I think you should have 50 square feet per street, not just per business. I'd also like to see better and more fair enforcement of the sign ordinance. It has not been enforced very well in the past. There's been a lot of exceptions, a lot of things just being ignored. I'm also on HARB. This is the first time I had heard that they're talking about having HARB looking at signs, which is kind of a surprise to me. I don't have any problem with doing that, but if that's what you want to do, I guess we'll do it. I also, there's another reason for my position on the sign ordinance is just economics. Most franchises have huge sign requirements. They want interstate size signs out there. And we had one before, and it was ridiculous, and that's the only thing that's stopping them from doing this is because of the ordinance. And it basically costs me money. And any franchise property in town, any chain gas station, a lot of restaurants, hotels, they all are our franchises. They will come back with a huge, 100 square foot flashing, rotating sign, which the business owner has to pay for. That's my personal opinion right there. As far as been discussion about having signs inside of windows, I think that is a real touchy subject. I know Gary Schaefer has expressed some opinions on that, and I think you don't want to get to the point where, if a business owner wants to promote his business inside a window, that we know better than they how they want to promote their business. I don't think that's particularly fair. I think that's all that I basically have. Like I said, I'd be very distressed if the sign ordinance were not renewed. So,
Sure.
okay?
Thank you, Mr. Witt.
You're welcome.
I have another issue, Matt.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm reading this wrong, because I obviously spent a lot of time going through this, and I'm still having trouble with a few parts. But if you're
This
on
is
page
15.
yeah, under size requirements, under C, the third one says structures with more than one business tenant and without individual business tenant entrances along a public right-of-way may provide up to a maximum of 32 square feet of signage for the structure and an additional 50 square foot of signage for each tenant space within the structure. The way I'm reading that is, say if you have, and there is one in town that I can think of, a business with one entrance and there's 3 businesses operating inside, that would be 182 square feet of signage. correct?
Yes,
Okay. Without the harbor view.
correct.
So I think then if you, by that logic, if you go back to 1, once you get over 50 for a single-use tenant, so like if Kenny's or the library want, because they're single-use more, they would have to go through this process, whereas these other ones would not. So I think something has to be fixed in there, so that it's like spatially more equal for the businesses, so. And I, personally, I like, you know, once you get over that 50 square foot, you would just stick to the 1-to-1 ratio, personally. I think if Kenny's or the library want to put up a sign on their building, and it would go spatially equal to, if they have 80 feet, then they get 80 feet. If they have 90, then they get 90. Because the 1-to-1 ratio is still, there are places that do more than that, as we looked at with 1.5 or 2 feet, 2 to 1. So personally, I like the marketing and the promotion of businesses being able to get people in.
So the uniqueness of the multi-tenant structure, the reason for the 32 square foot, that's the basis of a directory sign. So you're advertising not necessarily a business, you're advertising the ability to rent space in the building, that business activity, also the tenants in the building. So that does create an opportunity for additional signage as proposed. In both of in the historic district, to go beyond, you'd have to go beyond the 50 square foot provision, you'd have to go before, as proposed, and as we'll discuss with the harbor board, they would review the sign package in accordance with the current design manual. It's very restrictive for the historic district. So being able to then have 50 square feet plus will be a challenge. Outside of the historic district, then you do have that ability to go 1-to-1. The benefit to having, I guess there is a benefit then to having the multi-tenant structure that only has one entrance, like a mall or something like that. If the board or if we have council doesn't like that, I mean, naturally we can edit it to make it more restrictive, we can open it up for the other structure types. One of the issues that we run into, especially with the single-use buildings, you're going to be limited at some level to how much physical signage you can put on the structure that's actually going to be advertising to either pedestrians or even the motoring public. How much signage is council comfortable with? I think this is going to be the discussion going forward. Is we're suggesting more. Is that we're getting kind of both sides. Some people really do want more signage. Some people are not necessarily on board with what we're proposing, and then there are even another class of just they don't necessarily want anything to change. So I don't have a great answer for you right now. I mean, I guess if it's something we can talk with the manager about, then to be able to get to a better consensus on that point.
I also served on the sign ordinance working group as well. I thought we had talked about limiting that when and we talked about the display sign. And that was something that I thought had reached consensus on as a working group. Or am I wrong on that?
I would have to go back to my notes on that
Yeah.
specifically, but
Like the Times building or a building where there's multiple businesses inside, that directory sign was going to kind of stand, I thought. maybe I'm mistaken.
I can't.
Well, that's a powerful example, I think. I know the example Peter was thinking, I'm sorry I omitted you earlier, I apologize.
okay.
But the Times Building is a powerful example because I think there can be like 12 different businesses in there. So are we talking about 650 square feet
Right.
of signage on the front of that building? I mean, that's, I think maybe not what was intended by expanding the limit, right? But that seems like a lot.
Again, I remember the conversation we had at in the working group, and this little device has changed things in
Yeah.
terms of how people find places. Because unlike what Mr. Witt was talking about, where you're out on Route 30, or you're coming in and you're in a vehicle, the idea of getting people here in the borough is to get them parked, and then they go out on foot to find, and people use these all the time. They put in where they're going to eat or where they're going to shop, and you can hit the car icon or the little pedestrian icon, and it's changed things because people can find their destination a lot easier now than they could 6, 8, 10 years ago. So, something else to think about.
I was really pleased that John was able to attend the Steinware bid meeting. I think it was very valuable for him to hear from the Steinware merchants. It's almost like we're two different cultures, downtown and Steinware. And I believe tourists go downtown for charm and authenticity, and our architecture really emphasizes that, of the downtown experience. I believe they don't go to Steinware for the historic, but more for a lovely place to visit, to shop, to eat. And that's what Steinware has become. Paul will remember in the old days when the visitor center was across the street, Steinware was different. And the renovation that has taken place since the bid was formed is just astounding. And Steinware is an attraction in itself now because of the bid. The visitor center moving is what sparked the initial interest in signage historically. That's why all the hoopla back when. When the visitor center moved, they took a lot of the automatic tourism with them because the buses would park over there and the people would come over to Steinware to shop and to eat. So Steinware had to do something to remedy that. And what they did was come together and come up with a product that is today lovely, attractive, walkable. It hasn't lost the historic nature because right across the street is that stretch of battlefield and you can see the monuments up high. But the focus of what is needed as far as drawing people there is a little different than what is downtown. And so John was able to see that really we've got two different challenges here. Observing the historic nature of downtown itself, the architecture and so on, and the business nature of what goes on in Steinware and the different purposes of why people visit each. Nothing's easy, as Gilda Radner said years ago.
And did the bid have a position on the 50 square foot limit?
John, did you get the impression that that was a thorn in their side? I did.
I had hoped to actually be able to, I was gonna talk to you after this meeting to be on the next bid meeting, just come to that one in May, because when I think of like the Best Western and, I mean, you have a lot of national brands there. I can imagine 50 square feet would be a little, too little for some brands. Now, that doesn't mean you can't. The example they always gave in school is the Golden Arches, and if you go down to Biltmore, you'll see literal golden arches, and it looks very nice and tasteful. You can do signage really well. It doesn't have to meet their templates. They can still sell 1 million Big Macs. Everyone will still be happy at the end of the day, but we'll be even happier because we won't have to look at tacky signage. So I think that it's a much more of a difficult, it's a more difficult challenge for those type of business customers that are coming in a franchise agreement, they're saying, they're being told as franchisees, you have to do this. If you're not gonna do this, we're gonna pull out. So I think getting around that type of aspect and being able to work with those developers is usually a little more challenging. At the same time, though, if you're a small business, you really want to get your name out there. The way you do that is with signage. So challenges in both buckets, but I mean, I would think that the challenges on Steinway are going to be such that the real challenge is that Steinway is in the historic district too. So being able to rectify the need for different type of commercial messaging in that area as compared to the downtown, and how do we make that work when the review is going to be really geared towards maintaining a very historic preservation aspect to the built environment.
An interesting point brought up by one of the merchants to John, was the display of what they have for sale as opposed to a sign. We'll just hang our merchandise out there. And back when we were addressing signage before, years ago, that was an issue. Some folks in town did not want the merchandise displayed outside of the stores. But it shows the tourists what they can find in that particular point of business.
One of the things that I didn't mention this in this discussion, when we're talking about interior signage, we're also laying down this idea of fenestration. So the physical amount of a window opening that can be covered up, general. So it's something that we've taken, not necessarily a position, but we've taken the general idea that there should be some kind of visibility into the structure is built into the draft. How much? We went with 40%. Reason being, I had an opportunity to measure the Majestic's windows, which actually there's a lot of signage in those windows, but at the same time there's a lot of windows. So it really, we were able to, in looking at those calculations, that's what 40% of the window area was being occupied by signage. So that was the basis for what's being proposed now. Is it an exact science? No, but at the same time, we're not receiving complaints about the windows at the Majestic. What we're receiving complaints about most generally are not even signage. It's the physical light that's being emitted by the signs and by the businesses that's creating interference with either residential areas or just the right of way. So it's tricky. One of the, I guess, that's why the goal of bringing this now as a final staff product to the business representative groups to be able to get some additional comment, and if we need to go back to the wheel, we'll do it.
Okay.
Matt.
Yes, ma'am. Would you mind speaking at the podium? There's a microphone so people can hear it on the video. Thank you.
I'll just ask that you consider, it's not only tourists that the businesses are trying to attract. So York Street, I think, has 17,000 vehicles per day, something like that. They're not tourists. They're not all tourists. So signage is important, right? We're trying to capture people that are driving by. Come in, come in. So the downtown needs marketing as well. We need visibility. So it's not only tourists that are coming to the borough, right? All those cars are driving by my businesses, trying to get them in. They don't know about the upper crust. Our windows go up. They look in. Hopefully they'll come back. So it's not only tourism that we're trying to attract.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'll just make a couple of comments since we're going all over the place here. First of all, I definitely hope that we reach out more to the small business owners. I understand that there was a Garma representation in those working groups, but Garma does not represent every small business because some people are not members of Garma. So I hope that we do get some more small business input on this. The 50 square feet, I think that could be the right number. I would like to see us consider 50 square feet per facade of the building. Some buildings happen to have a facade that's on an alley or a street or two streets, not just the front facade, but they're on a corner. That's ample opportunity to market. And just as Ms. Attia just said, when someone sees a sign, it might not even be, it's gonna make them stop. It's gonna make, oh, look at that, let's pull over and park. And they might go to that one, but they might also go to 3 others. It's pulling them in. So I think an empty wall on, because it's not the front facade, and there's an opportunity there to market, to bring people to park and visit, is a great opportunity there. So I would recommend we consider 50 square feet per facade, not just the front. And then also, in regards to the interior, whether it's lighted or window, that's a hard pill to swallow for me. Us telling the businesses, you can't cover your windows. What's the difference if I had shades that I pulled down and you can't see in anyway? So I think that I would voice that my opinion is, let's just maintain the outside and not the inside.
So the question about multiple facades was certainly one of the ones posited to the working group. So does anybody who was on that group have anything to report about that discussion?
Well, my opinion is, and this doesn't lay it out perfectly clear either, so I do think that we've got to be clear in the language here. If this is per facade, which is facing a public right-of-way, I'm of the opinion, and I agree with Chad, that it should be per public-facing right-of-way facade. Because you need to get people in. Even if it's an alley and there's people going by, I want to give the businesses the opportunity to market their business. And yeah, blank walls are not my cup of tea.
Well, alleys are not for transit. They are for direct access by local users under the Pennsylvania Vehicle Code. So theoretically, the only people using those alleys already know everything that's on either side of them. So I think there's an argument to be made there as well. The alleys are not for the visitor. They're for local access only, for the people who have properties fronting on those alleys.
Are we talking, I should rephrase. I think what you're talking about, Matt, is drivable alleys. And I think I'm talking about pedestrian alleys.
I don't think that pedestrian alleys exist under the Pennsylvania Vehicle Code. So.
Right.
Right. So was there discussion about multiple facades?
There was. A lot of it had to deal with pedestrian visible signage. So counting those areas of a structure, and this was, I guess, this was more in the beginning because we went through, getting up to 50 square feet, getting up to the 1-to-1 ratio. Generally, though, the idea that the group seemed to enjoy was that areas that are publicly viewable should be open for signage. Portions of the structure that you can't see it, say if it's completely blocked in, or if it's just structures in a manner that there's no real public access. There might be a yard or something, but not necessarily an area where the public would congregate. There's no real need for commercial messaging in those locations. It also came up when at one point, staff had suggested signage related to, signage directory signage, directional signage, whatever have you. Signage that would be in parking areas directed at that, that was scrapped though, because it really came down to making sure that the business tenant had adequate signage, that once we were talking about the rear of the building, then things got a little wonky and not necessarily conducive to, you'd have a situation where you'd have a whole multitude of square footage that's not really being used for anything other than do not enter, or a directional sign pointing someone to go to the front of the building, where if there was signage there, that would be better.
So the working group did not feel that the provision needed to be considered, or I guess I'm not following.
Well, okay, so to enable increased signage, I guess what the working group came to the conclusion with those areas outside of the historic district, allowing for the entire structure to be utilized for the sign area computation. So you can go above the 50 square feet outside the historic district based on that 1-to-1 ratio.
Okay, I think I understand. All right. Does that answer your questions?
Not really, no. Does it answer anybody else's? I think it's very confusing. I think that 50 square feet is a good number, but again, it should be open to all facades. I can think of properties within the historic district that are on alleys. Some are drivable alleys, some are on side streets that aren't an alley, but an actual street, such as Middle Street, Stratton Street. There's some off on, I feel like there's Chambersburg, there's Washington. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there where there's walls that are just walls, and it's like, there could be a 50 square foot for that facade too, to pull people in to, hey, pull over, park, and come and shop and dine and all of that. I don't think that we, so no, it didn't really answer my question, but.
Okay. Do you have follow-up questions about the product that the working group?
I just would encourage more input from actual small business owners.
There were some small business owners that were part of the
That were
working
part of
group.
it?
Yeah, it wasn't just Karma. Yeah.
I would encourage more.
Okay, so maybe
Would
we keep
encourage
that
more.
question on your list as you talk to these different constituent groups.
And that has really been we would have about 15, 20 minutes every single meeting. How do we get to the right square footage amount? Because
I think the square footage is, I'm not debating the number. I'm debating why is it just the front facade? And maybe you're saying to me, no, it's not just the front facade.
well, yeah. So that's the other thing. We really wanted to open it up and allow for they can put the signage anywhere, but encouraging them and that it's limited to put it where it makes the most sense.
Right,
So
that's what
the front of the building.
that's where my argument is.
Yeah, like, we didn't write in that it has to be at the front,
Right.
but it doesn't say multiple facades either.
I'm saying that it should be multiple.
I agree.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying if a building has an opportunity to advertise, and again, that advertising may just be for their one business, but I guarantee you, people that are seeing it are walking to it or pulling over and parking, and they're visiting other things as well. So it's an opportunity to not just market that business, but to market the downtown, period.
The current ordinance is written that way, where it's 50 square feet per facade that faces an alley. That's how it's written. So you might say this is less restrictive. It's not. The current ordinance reads 50 square feet per facade that faces an alley.
So, all right, thank you for that. There's, as you know, disagreement on that because the very next line says there's a maximum 50 square feet total per building. So I know, I understand. I'm going to call this to order here, okay? Thank you for your input, but there's disagreement. But we are addressing this question in the rewrite. And I think that's what Chad is asking people to continue to consider. All right, so what else do we need to discuss here tonight?
Well, I have some general direction. If there's anything else, I guess, glaring that council would like for staff to either pursue some additional signage opportunities or some things that you see in the ordinance that are definitely a no-go.
I have a question. I see Mr. Petters here, blue and gray. And I'm looking at, you have illuminated signs in your window inside, correct? I'm looking at the draft. I really can't see that prohibition. Am I missing something with
So
that?
they would not be prohibited.
Okay.
Well, so, looking at the structure's windows, there would be a limitation on 40% of those of the window glazing, the entire building could be dedicated to signage.
And they don't have to be 12 inches set back. Was that in the previous?
That was in the previous one.
And that isn't in this one?
It is not in the staff draft.
Okay.
The total window space of the building or of the storefront?
That was the good question. We I want to say we didn't actually stop at storefront, and that's something we could do. But I'd have to go. I'm looking at it right here. I believed it was just looking at the entire building, and that does create a problem because you gotta have well, not necessarily a problem. It would create additional signage opportunity. We did move on from 40% of each window.
Do you know where in here that is? I'm trying to find it.
Take control real quick. If I can do it. There we go.
Okay, I found it. It's on page 18. It says the building's total fenestration.
Yeah.
So not the storefront, the building. So that imagines a building where the owner has a storefront and apartments above. They could theoretically put their signage covering the windows of the apartments above that they are then renting out to tenants.
It would be permitted by the staff draft now. I'm sensing some reluctance from the council, president at least. One thing we could do with that, if council feels that that is too much signage, or it provides the potential for too much signage on a structure, we could limit it to business tenants fenestration and language, do the wordsmithing to make that happen.
Yeah, I don't think I could get behind that one. That's a little, I think that is not in keeping with the goal of, one, expanding the commercial opportunity for signage, but then also maintaining the character of the downtown area. I personally don't believe people come here to look at signs. I think they come here to look at the architecture and the battlefield and the historic aspects of our town. In fact, I can't think of a single topic we've ever broached in this room where the subject of history did not come up, including parking. That would be I could not get behind that, no.
Can I just ask, Mr. Whitmore, could you explain what your next steps are, I think, just for the community to understand, because you're planning to go to business, meet with businesses,
Yeah,
business
so-
owners to,
Certainly. Next
Thank you.
Wednesday, I'll be or I guess this Wednesday.
Yeah.
I'll be attending the Main Street meeting. I have put out some requests to be able to attend Destination Gettysburg, ARMA. Let's see.
The chamber.
Yes, the chamber, and then also if opportunity to speak at the bid meeting, and then HARB. After which, the comments would then be presented, and we'd have some formal discussion at a regular council meeting, unless if the requests are so unique that we need to have another workshop meeting to discuss the draft, the comments raised, and then figuring out a way forward.
Yeah, I think it would require at least another workshop and then a hearing, right?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
I think we can discuss that. I think that comes kind of under council's purview, what you wish to do. I don't think it's mandated, but council may very much wish to have a public hearing in that regard. Again, at the end of the day, though, what we need to accomplish is we need to accomplish the enactment of an ordinance that meets the borough council's legislative intent. You folks are the legislators.
Yes.
The buck stops right at this table, so.
That 40% repeats also on page 19 for non-exterior signage as well. Unless it's the same one again. All right, I might have just scrolled
I
backwards.
think that's the same.
Okay. All right, anything else on that? Anybody have any glaring things that they wanted to talk about?
Just as one of the public comments on this very topic was, just bring it, I don't remember I'm not gonna quote her. So if we can just make sure that we look back at the comments that were made by the general manager of the Gettysburg Hotel regarding signage, because of how many businesses are actually operating within that whole complex. She made a very good point, or three. So if we can just review the minutes on what she said exactly and make sure that we consider that. That's not the only owner, business in town with several businesses in one building, but that's something to consider. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Great. All right, that takes us to the Gettysburg Welcome Center, Construction and Management.
So as we all know, the borough is the recipient of a $1.27 million congressional appropriation for construction of the visitor center. Main Street Gettysburg has been leading the charge on the development of that parcel, along with some borough staff. And we've been working with an architect to design the building, and much of those renderings have been out there for public consumption for some time now. So it had been noted by a few members of the public that the current design of the Welcome Center does not include an elevator. The exclusion of an elevator in the initial design of the building was done as a cost-cutting measure and is permissible, meaning not having an elevator is permissible, as the size and use of the building does not legally require or mandate one. However, despite this lack of legal requirement, it was suggested that it would still be desirable to have an elevator in the building. Elevators are very costly mechanical features that not only require a sizable initial financial outlay, to the better part of $150,000 to construct, but also require significant annual maintenance and inspection, which also adds to the building's ongoing operational costs. Accordingly, the incorporation of a vertical platform lift would serve the same function as an elevator, but at roughly a third of the cost of a traditional elevator. And an example of that platform I will put on the screen for you now. So the new design, the revised design rather, of the Welcome Center will incorporate something like the feature you see on the screen here, which is an internal platform lift as opposed to a traditional mechanical elevator that requires substantial mechanical equipment and hydraulics to operate. given our appropriations from Congress and the efforts of Main Street Gettysburg, we are confident we can absorb another $50,000 into the design of the structure that incorporates this. So moving forward, we intend to implement this. It will probably lengthen the building by about 10 feet or so, which if you looked at the renderings, there was a little porch structure on the back of the building. That is where this would be incorporated internally into the new design of the building. So there's no formal action from council required on this unless you're opposed to this. We should know that, but I would think this is something that most people would support.
Great.
I have something I want to add
Please.
about that. In an unpaid advertisement, we had our covered device, electronic device turn-in on Saturday, and a car pulled in to our operation with New York plates. And some of us thought, well, they've come a long way to recycle their televisions. But then Becca was serving as our point of the spear greeter, and the fellow leaned out the window and said, "Is this the new visitor center? We're looking for the visitor center." And Becca said, "No, this is our Public Works building, but you're welcome to take a tour." That's great.
That's funny. That is funny. All right. Okay. Anything else on that subject?
Not unless you have questions.
Anybody have questions about that inclusion? All right. All right. That takes us to temporary reservation of metered parking spaces for museums and churches. Ms. Bissell. And Gable.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure where anybody wants me to start, but did everybody see the options as far as the places of worship that had requested parking? I did come up with 3 options there. Well, 2 plus what we already have. And if anybody had any questions on them?
I have a question. It says these signs are not ADA compliant and couldn't be forced, and I do understand that, but what do you mean by they're not ADA compliant?
So like, the ADA spaces have like the curb cuts and everything to allow the wheelchairs and things to get up onto the sidewalk. They also don't have like the minimum, to be fined for parking in a handicap is, it has to have the minimum and maximum fine amounts.
So a question, would they have to be handicap parking? Because originally, they were putting bags on themselves saying reserved church parking, is that correct?
But that's what they were using them for. It was reserved church parking for their handicap.
That's for all their handicap?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what their original uses were
Okay.
long before me.
So that's not going to change anything, and they wouldn't have to pay for anything, correct?
It depends which option you pick.
Number one option.
With the signs, correct.
Okay.
Because they'd be there all the time, and then as you can see, it just says Sundays, that's reserved for that, just on Sundays from 7 to 1. Which is when they were using the bags.
Okay.
And these signs would be permanently installed on the meter poles or?
Concrete, probably, they were on a metal pole, the school parking signs on High Street, that said no parking during school hours, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 4. Those were on the metal. They were in.
Channel post sign.
Okay. Feelings?
So again, my question would be, people can park there except for Sundays from 7 to 1 o'clock, is that correct?
Right.
I'm for that one then.
But if an able-bodied person were to park there, the sign is unenforceable.
It's enforceable by sign prohibits.
Oh.
We just can't enforce the handicap tickets.
Oh, I
which
see.
is a higher
Okay.
cost.
Got it.
But we could do sign prohibits.
Okay.
And do you see any fallback from potentially having someone in a wheelchair parking and reserving, or parking in that space, and then expecting there to be an ADA compliant sidewalk there?
I don't think so. I mean, currently, how they were operating with the bags, that's what, there wasn't a
I'm
ramp
just thinking of new people who may just decide as tourists to come and visit the church on a Sunday and say, this is great. I've never been to Gettysburg. I'm going to attend church here. And then they see that the sidewalk is not compliant, but the space is there, which is great, but the sidewalks, I'm just wondering if there's a concern about that.
I wouldn't think so. On High Street, you have an alley access there, so it wouldn't be too many spaces away. On the Chambersburg Street would be the only issue that doesn't have any ramps like that.
And do you know if behind Christ Lutheran, if there are spaces in the back for handicap?
I'm not sure.
I used to know.
If I just a guess, I would say no, because if you've ever been there, the steps down.
Yeah, you have to go
to
down
the
the steps
church.
to go,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I don't know if they have a ramp. I can't even remember if there's a ramp back there. There is a ramp, okay.
But
There
no
is-
parking spaces for handicap in the back.
It might be too steep, though.
Yeah, just curious.
It might be a very steep ramp. I
And
think it might
winter and
be
yeah.
higher than 1 in 12, certainly.
Okay.
Okay. Is anybody opposed to option number 1? I think option number 1's a fairly elegant solution.
I agree with 1. I don't think we should charge the churches.
No.
I would disagree. I would disagree with 1, and I would charge the churches just like everybody else.
But we don't charge during that time.
We don't charge.
But it's about a reserved space.
It's about the reservation.
It's about reserving it for them only. If this was not a church and it was a business on a Sunday, 7 a.m. to whatever p.m., would the business be charged if they wanted a reserved bag on that meter for their business only?
They would indeed.
They would. It's about a reserved space. It's not about if the meter was free or not. If they want to park there, they can, but if they want it reserved for them, it's about a reserved space. I don't agree with the handicap signs. I think that that's going down a slippery slope. Just if someone were to come and see the handicap parking sign and park there because they're thinking it's a handicap parking space, but it's not really ADA compliant. Is there a reason why? I mean, I'm more of in favor of number 2 and 3 than 1.
We would need an ordinance change for all of these, correct?
Except 3.
So we would
because-
vote on this as a council.
Except number 3, because that's already currently what's in our ordinance.
I'm in favor of number 3 or number 2. I'm not really seeing a huge difference in number 2 and 3 though. Borough staff will be responsible for placing the hotel, a monthly bag on your. I mean, are
Number
we
1, it's not charging for the rental of the space because it's not technically saying that only the church attendees can use those spaces. So it's only reserving them for handicap.
It's taking a space away from the public that would have been free to the public from Sundays 7 a.m. to 1 p.m.
But it's still open to the public.
If they want it for.
How's it taken away from the public? The public is gonna use
Well,
it.
yes. If it's a handicap sign, then the handicap public can use it, yes. If it's not a handicap sign, then the public can't use it.
I think there could be a concern with the signs that they are, visible and they are a very widely recognized symbol. And I think we could see them, if you're just driving by and you saw that and you didn't get out of your car to read it, you would just say, oh, I can't park there and keep going. So those signs could create confusion, the rest of the week.
I'm just in favor of number 3 because we have We already have this in place. If you want reserved spaces, there's a way to do it.
But why would you charge for a time when they're not generally charged?
Because they want it for them only.
Right.
Just as if it were, if it weren't, if it was flip-flopped and it was the burger, the Gettysburger across the street, and the Gettysburger wanted it from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Sundays only for the Gettysburger, they would be forced to get the reservation, reserve bag and pay for them. Am I right?
If it was for a bus or moving or something like that, they couldn't, yeah, whatever already falls in with the
I
ordinance.
feel like we already have it in place.
Well, we can vote on it, and you can vote against it. And,
Yeah.
you know, I care about the old people. I go to church
It's not
on
about
Sunday. Well,
it's not about
it
that,
kind of
Chris.
is. And
It's
it
not about
kind
that.
it kind of is.
Because we're
It kind of
telling
is
one- we're
about, and there's a
telling one-
lot of
we're telling
old people
one business
that
that
go
they
and
can't.
we
Speak
took,
one at a time, please.
we took it away from them. And businesses, and then we get all this type of thing. Look deep in your heart. When you go there, we got ushers taking care of these old people. And there's a lot of them. And a lot of people have disabilities. And for a lot of Americans, that's the most important hour of the week. The most important hour. It's not like going to get a hamburger. So I would like you to consider that.
I'll consider that for sure, but I'm also considering other businesses that we are saying, no, they can't do that. We're telling them, no, you can't place the bags.
Well,
You can't take down those bags. So I'm saying, make it equal for everybody. Everybody's gotta follow the same rule.
Okay, so we've heard two pretty strong positions here. I think I need to hear from everybody, though.
What's the current rate for the bags?
Those particular ones would be $18 per day.
High Street would be 12.
Yeah, sorry, thank you.
Chambersburg Street would be 18 per meter.
Could you reduce the rates across the borough on Sundays?
Or take Sundays away completely like it used to be. There's a brick drop for you.
Well, that would not alleviate the reservation issue, though.
No, you wouldn't. They'd still have to reserve. But the reasoning behind all of this is, yes, they were getting it all free on Sundays before. They've still been getting it all free on Sundays. But now we've got this issue with reserved parking, and people want reserved parking. Well, reserved parking is for that business, church, whatever it is, only. So yes, it's available to the public, for the public that are going there, to that location, when it's reserved for them. If it was open and free to everybody at all times, then it's open and free for everybody at all times.
Okay, I think you've articulated your position. Alicia, do you have a preference here?
I was thinking of a compromise in some way of, you know, having the reservation and having the meter bags, reducing the costs across the board somehow to make it, I guess, more affordable if that's the complaint, the costs. Not the, I was assuming, listening to the representatives from the churches, that it was the cost, right? It was becoming cost prohibitive, or no, it was more like we need the spaces there because, of course, we have several handicapped members in our congregation.
We're not getting money on that space anyway on Sundays
Right.
between 7 to 1, right?
Right.
So that's kind of moot. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Bales. I'd say number 1.
Yeah, the issue was associated with the self-administration of the reservations.
Gotcha. Well, just so it's clear for the public, I mean, if anyone who is handicapped wants to park there on Sundays from 7 to 1, they would be able to do that.
That's true.
Just clarifying.
Mhm.
Would it be possible that the parishioners would lose their spaces should a bus come downtown, or you have tourists visiting and they decide, hey, this looks like a fine place to park, and they would lose those spaces. I'm just thinking about the possible
I don't
ways
think
that the
of-
sign could sort of be like,
I don't think a bus could take handicap spaces.
if it had all handicapped people on it. That's what I'm thinking. I
Well,
mean, you've
this
got 8
last month,
spaces there.
buses have been taking pretty much anything they want in town, so I think they would do that.
I think, back to what Mr. Moon said earlier, I think what Mr. Moon said about the handicap reserved space, reserved sign, Sundays 7 a.m. to 1 p.m., it could be confusing for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
People, even when it's got the verbiage on there of this date, this time, they see the blue handicap sign and they keep on driving,
Yep,
looking for another space.
yep. Mrs. Butterfield?
I think we have to be careful about the verbiage explaining what's going on, because there's just not unlimited space there to explain all the ifs, ands, and buts. I think simple is best.
So in many cities, parking signs are prevalent and confusing and wordy.
That's right.
I actually, just today, I saw a meme online, and in the background of the subject of the meme, you could see a no parking sign that says, "No parking south of this sign." And that's really depending on people having a keen sense of direction, I think.
Or a compass in their pocket.
Right, yeah, that was, if I got ticketed there, I would make a strong argument about how bad a Boy Scout I was. I personally like the idea, option number 1, but I do think that the common symbology there of the blue background and the accessibility symbol would create confusion the other 6 days of the week. I think people would just keep driving by.
And Chad has found some signs, clearly we can't bring it up on his computer, but it looks like the regular, and it just says reserve parking in the green, and then the blue symbol, and then it says Sunday only. And it's the 12 by 18.
And I found some too that don't use the blue symbol at all. They just say for disabled or something like that. So there's different options. I think if you wanted the concept, if you want to do it or not, and then we can come up with a sign that might not be that industry standard blue wheelchair sign.
Yep. Yep.
Because that industry standard blue wheelchair sign to me symbolizes ADA compliant.
And that does, yeah.
With the tags in the car and you name it. It's that I would presume. That's all I'm thinking is,
Well,
I
could the,
just don't want to be like smoke and mirrors.
could the borough put a sign out there just from 7 to 1 on Sunday?
Well, yeah, that's one of the options too.
Instead of having it there all week,
Sandwich boards.
you would have,
I mean, that's essentially option number 2, but with a sign instead of a bag.
Yeah, we still need the staff to do that.
so something with number 1, where you just have it put out on Sunday. So it's not confusing the other days of the week.
Okay. So it sounds like the majority of people would support the first approach, but there's a question of what the content of that sign would be, and we don't want to create confusion. So perhaps the two of you can work together, come up with a proposal for that signage for us.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Where's the lights? All right. Unless anybody has anything else to throw in that, then I'd like to move on. Okay, thank you. The next issue is the SS4A grant application, Mr. Gable.
SS4A is an acronym for Safe Streets and Roads for All. And I'll just read out of the fact sheet so that everyone is a little more familiar with the program. This is the next grant that the borough would like to submit. And essentially, it creates a funding mechanism to put together a borough-wide street plan from which you can then apply for implementation SS4A funds in years down the road. So the United States Department of Transportation Safe Streets and Roads for All SS4A program provides grants to local, regional, tribal communities for implementation, planning, and demonstration activities as part of a systematic approach to prevent deaths and serious injuries on the nation's roadways. This roadway safety program was created by the bipartisan infrastructure law and provides $5 billion over 5 years. The funding helps communities address the preventable crisis of deaths on our nation's roads, streets, and highways through safer people, roads, and vehicles, appropriate vehicle speeds, and improved post-crash care. The SS4A program funds are two types, the first being the planning and demonstration grants for which we are applying, which include supplemental safety planning and demonstration activities to inform the action plan, which would then be the implementation grants for construction of designated projects. Here is the draft of our application to the SS4A program. Speaking with the borough engineer, we think we can put this master road plan together at a rate of about $150,000. The SS4A program has a 20% cost share, so the borough would be responsible for $30,000 of that $150,000. So if this is something the council would like to pursue, we will go ahead and formally submit this. The next round is in mid-May, so we would need some direction pretty soon from the council as to whether or not you would like to pursue this. The idea here is to create an ongoing mechanism for projects post Baltimore Street revitalization. So we're already thinking past that project.
So I guess I'm missing what precisely we'd be spending this on.
The master plan. You need to have a master plan in place before you can apply for implementation funds.
I see.
And the master plan has to look at borough-wide.
Right.
Right.
Can't specify a street.
So earlier, you mentioned that we don't have a plan for Chambersburg Street. This would be
This
help
would-
develop that plan for Chambersburg
Right,
Street.
right.
The SS4A program, like Charles said, will fund projects in the tens of millions, but you can't get to the implementation stage until you plan for it. They require the planning stage first.
Understood.
And this is borough-wide, not just the square and the spokes off of that?
that's right.
Okay.
Okay.
It seems like we need to do it. We really don't have a choice if we want to go after the other monies.
You want to go for the big money, you need
Yeah.
to have
Yeah.
this in place
So that
first.
seems like a no-brainer.
What is the timetable you think to put this together? Do you think
Well,
we
the
can do it?
draft's pretty much done. I mean, it needs
We'd
a
be
little
ready to go
tweaking
in
yet.
May?
Yeah, May 16th, I think, is the submission deadline.
So what are folks' feelings on committing $30,000 to this process? This is another one of those opportunities, I think, where we could put some dollars into planning our future, and you know, we have to start with seedlings if we want to see trees one day. So that's kind of what this is.
It's a good analogy.
Would the company that we talked about before, the grant writers, would they be writing the grant?
Well, they're the ones that helped us draft this that you see right here on the screen.
And then would our lobbyists be assisting us with this?
That would be the plan.
We essentially gave the lobbyists our two projects, were this one and the raise grant for the Baltimore Street project.
They're laser focused on those two things, raise being the priority.
Folks?
Great idea.
I'm seeing a lot of nodding.
Okay?
Let's do it. All right.
And the final topic on tonight's agenda is really just kind of a housekeeping item. For some time, the borough has been frustrated by by our inability to truly operate in the 21st century with things like online payments for various bills and fees. However, it's our online payments aren't necessarily permitted in our ordinances. So we've identified some ordinances that may need to be tweaked to allow for online payments. As of now, the only way we can accept payments is cash or check.
So so we would have to amend all of those ordinances? Individually? Or can we create a new ordinance that allows us to accept online payments?
I think it's worthy of exploration.
Yeah.
Whether,
Well,
or.
you dig into that one there, buddy.
So, I mean, we did go down this road somewhat in that a few years ago, we amended a lot of ordinances.
We did.
There was a list of them to allow for fees to change by fee resolution as opposed, previously fees were spelled out in ordinances. That language in many ordinances has been removed, which is now why at budget time we're looking at a fee resolution that that covers all of these various ordinances.
Right.
This would be a similar process.
So you're really talking about e-commerce, and
Yeah,
there's 15 of them up there, and
right,
and it brings us into the modern day.
right.
We already do it for parking tickets. I know because I paid 2 parking tickets
Yes,
last month.
that-
It's
that-
very easy to do that.
That is about the only place where
Yeah.
we have e-commerce going right now.
Makes sense.
Do we actually allow taxi service? I was under the impression we didn't.
We have a taxi ordinance, so, and we have a taxi fee in the fee resolution.
Okay. So, yeah, I think it's worth looking into whether we can do this sort of en masse or not.
Overarching
Yeah.
policies.
Mm-hmm.
Stormwater would be great to back.
So,
Yeah, that would be
I'm gonna
much
ask
better.
Mr. Eastman to look into options here. Because that looks expensive.
That does, that's not.
All right. All right, anything else on that one, anyone? Okay. That takes us back to our second public comment. This section is not reserved to items on the agenda. Please limit yourself to 5 minutes. We need your name, your address of residence, please.
Thank you. My name is Mark Murphy. I live on Fairview Avenue, and I'm here in representation of St. Francis Xavier Church. I just want to say thank you very much to the council for remaining seized on the parking issue. We really appreciate it, and especially the borough staff. I mean, clearly they've done a lot of work and research and taken up their time and thoughts, and thank you for considerations.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment?
My name is Nancy Goodmestead. I own the Shriver House at 309, 307 Baltimore Street. And I'm still so very confused. I don't understand why you are wasting all this time on this whole meter situation when it was sailing along smoothly for years and years and years and years. I believe I told you I contacted the state of Pennsylvania. There is no reason why an individual can't put meter bags on and off. And I've never really been able to get a good answer from anyone here on why all of a sudden, after doing it for 27 years, you've decided, no, I can't do it. I don't understand it at all. And I just wish you would use common sense. And, you know, I talk to people in the Borough Council and they say, well, you know, Sunday will be tough to bag the meters at the churches because of staffing. And then other times you say, well, the reason I could do it in the past is because they didn't have enough staff. Well, now you have bigger staff, and so it's a little bit easier, but then yet you don't have staff to do it on Sundays over there. And once again, I would just wish you would look at common sense, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it, because it was just working fine for many, many, many years. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, before we adjourn, Vice President Butterfield had something she wanted to say.
Yes, and as mentioned before, on Saturday, we had our state-required covered device, electrical device turn-in. We had 62 customers drive through. The dumpster was just packed full of flat-screen TVs when they were finished. We had 12 no-shows, which is about average of what we see. Things come up unexpectedly and keep people from keeping their appointments. Something we're going to have to work on with the website sign-in. We had 18 who were registered but did not show up on the list that is forwarded to me. But many thanks to Robbie, and please thank Bradley for us. And many thanks to Becca. Please pass on to Bill Gardner our thanks. Karen Mesher did a good job. And our colleague, Chris here, was a big help. And John Butterfield, who knew better than to not show up and help. So it was a successful day. Our next event is a paper shredding event coming up the third Friday in May. So put that on your calendars. It's open to everybody in the borough at no fee. Those outside the borough may also participate for a small fee. Sarah, are we saying $3 a box again? $3 a box, but if a sofa or a refrigerator came in the box, that doesn't count. Don't bring that one. That will be in May. Third Friday in May. And we'll do our covered device, our electrical device again in 6 months or so.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Folks, I know some of you didn't come to say something publicly, and still you showed interest in the civic process, and we appreciate you all being here. And with that, we will adjourn to executive session.